throwaway account because there's no way I can ever say this out loud, even to a friend. I'm not proud of what happened, but the more I try to pretend it didn't, the more it claws at me. I need to let it out somewhere.
So here I am.
I married my husband 3 years ago. He's good to me, stable and kind, but if I'm honest, the spark between us died before the wedding pictures had time to fade. We're one of those couples people call comfortable, and I used to think that was enough. But comfort can start to feel a lot like invisibility when you're the only one trying to be seen. We haven't been intimate in over a year. He doesn't touch me. He doesn't even seem to notice when I try anymore. My stepson, Tyler, moved in with us 6 months ago. He's 22, home for a year before heading off to grad school. I told myself it would be a good change, more energy in the house, someone to talk to. It was harmless at first. We got along well. He was polite, a little reserved. I think he was trying not to step on my toes. The first thing I noticed was how often he worked out. The quiet discipline of it. I'd pass him in the hallway, shirt damp with sweat, and I'd feel something. A flicker of heat I hadn't felt in a long time. I told myself I was just noticing, nothing more. I wasn't looking for anything. But the noticing didn't stop. It grew. I started to care more about how I looked. I wore fitted clothes again, checked myself twice before going downstairs. I started lingering when we talked, laughing at his jokes longer than I should have. One night, my husband was out of town for work, and I decided to unwind in the sauna in our basement. It's one of those indulgent additions we never use, and I wanted to be alone, to think, to feel something. I wrapped myself in a towel, dimmed the light, and sat with the steam wrapping around me like a blanket. I was sweating, letting go, eyes closed, lost in my own emptiness. I didn't hear the door open at first. Just the shift in air, the sudden awareness that I wasn't alone anymore. When I looked up, Tyler was standing there. For a second, neither of us moved. His eyes met mine, widened slightly, then flicked down. He wasn't supposed to see me like that, not so bare, not so vulnerable. I clutched the towel tighter, heart pounding, but I couldn't say anything. He muttered something, sorry, I didn't know, and turned to leave, but he hesitated at the door. He looked back at me. Just a glance. But it stayed. Later that night, I replayed that moment over and over. The way his eyes had lingered, not out of disrespect, but curiosity.
Heat.
He wasn't a boy, and I wasn't invisible to him. That terrified me, more than anything, because I liked it. I felt awake for the first time in what felt like forever. Things shifted after that. Subtle at first, a different kind of silence between us. He didn't avoid me, but his eyes would rest on me a little too long. I'd catch him, and neither of us would say anything. The air felt electric, charged with something unspoken. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was just in my head. But I knew better. There was a tension there that hadn't existed before. It wasn't just me. I started using the sauna more. It became my little escape. Sometimes I'd stay longer than I needed to, just to feel the heat, the pulse of something that reminded me I was alive. I'd wonder if he was upstairs, if he was thinking about that night too. I knew how wrong it was. I knew the line we were walking. One afternoon, I was coming out of the sauna when I heard him in the kitchen. Hair still wet, skin flushed. I grabbed a bottle of water and went upstairs. He looked at me when I walked in, and his eyes dropped again. Not in a way that was gross or overt. It was just there. That quiet awareness. We made small talk. Nothing special. But the way he watched me, the way he leaned just a little closer, the way his voice softened when he asked how I was feeling, all of it felt different. Intentional. And I didn't stop it. The worst part is, I felt powerful. Desired. Like someone saw me again. And I let myself lean into it. Just a little. Enough to feel it. Enough to make me forget that this was my husband's son. I remember the first time he touched me, even if it was innocent. He passed by in the hallway, and his hand brushed my arm. Just a light touch. But my skin burned for minutes after. I stood in the bathroom afterward, staring at my reflection, wondering who I was becoming. I started to dread my husband coming home. Not because I didn't love him in some way, but because his presence was a reminder of the life forming in our house, of how much I had drifted. I wasn't doing anything. Not really. But the line was already breaking. And I think deep down I knew it was just a matter of time. One night, I found myself looking through old photos, pictures of me before I married again. Younger, laughing, glowing. I hardly recognized myself. I don't know when I stopped feeling like her. But I missed that version of me, desperately. The one who felt things, who wanted things. Tyler walked in unexpectedly. He asked if I was okay, and I laughed, brushing away a tear. He sat beside me and we talked. Just talked. About life, about time, about everything and nothing. He was thoughtful, more mature than I'd given him credit for. He listened. At some point, our hands touched. Neither of us pulled away. There wasn't a kiss. Not yet. But the air between us was thick, trembling. We both knew something was shifting. Something dangerous. That night, I lay awake in bed, my husband snoring beside me, and all I could think about was how warm Tyler's hand had been. How close he'd sat. How I hadn't wanted that moment to end. And that terrified me more than anything. Because I knew it wasn't over. Not even close. I avoided him for 2 days after that night. I needed space to think, to convince myself that it was a harmless moment. But nothing about it felt harmless. My thoughts wouldn't let it go. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, the way he looked at me, the silent understanding in his expression. And worse, I kept remembering how I felt, seen, wanted, like I mattered again. On the 3rd day, he knocked on my door, just to ask if I needed anything from the store. He didn't bring up what happened. He didn't have to. It hung between us, unspoken but heavy. I said I was fine. I wasn't. That night, I passed him in the hallway. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that amplifies everything. I felt him watching me as I walked by. I didn't look back, but I didn't need to. The air behind me was thick with things neither of us were saying. I could feel it all over my skin. The next morning, he left a note on the counter. Hope your day is better today. Simple, thoughtful, but it made my stomach twist.
It meant he was thinking about me.
It meant he noticed my moods. Something my husband hadn't done in months. Later, we ended up in the kitchen at the same time. He was making coffee, I was grabbing water. We stood close. Too close for comfort. I could feel the warmth from his body, his breath, when he spoke. You okay? He asked. I'm fine, I said. He paused, then said, You don't seem fine. That should have been the moment I pulled away. I didn't. Instead, I looked up at him and whispered, I'm just tired. His expression softened. He reached out like he was going to touch my arm again, but stopped himself. That moment lingered. Something passed between us that neither of us stopped. Neither of us denied. I told myself it wasn't physical. Not yet. That emotional connection doesn't count. But it does. It absolutely does. And I knew we were already in too deep. One evening, we were alone in the living room. My husband had taken an overnight trip. Tyler sat beside me on the couch. We were watching something, background noise. Neither of us cared about it. Our focus was somewhere else entirely. He asked about my life before the marriage. I told him things I hadn't even told my husband. I opened up without realizing I was doing it. He listened genuinely. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty solutions. Just listened. He told me he always thought I seemed sad. Not in a dramatic way, but quiet. Like I carried too much alone. That hit harder than I expected. I didn't realize it was that visible. We kept talking, leaning in a little more, voices getting softer. At one point, I laughed at something he said and he smiled, but it wasn't just amusement. It was something deeper. Something that lingered behind his eyes. I looked at his lips before I even realized what I was doing. Then I kissed him. It was fast, instinctual. No planning, no lead-up. Just a desperate, impulsive reaction. The second it happened, I pulled back, breath caught in my throat, terrified of what I'd done. He looked at me, stunned. But he didn't look angry or confused. Just serious. His eyes searched mine, and for a second, I thought he might say something. Instead, I stood up and left the room.
I didn't sleep that night.
I lay awake, heart pounding, guilt spreading through me like poison. What had I done? How had I let it get this far? The next morning, I avoided him again. I couldn't face what I had done, what it meant. I expected him to be distant, cold. But he wasn't. He was quiet, respectful, but not distant. Later that afternoon, he knocked on my bedroom door. I opened it, expecting confrontation. Instead, he just said, "Can we talk?" I stepped aside. He didn't sit down. He didn't touch me. He just said, "I know that kiss meant something to you, because it did to me." I didn't respond. He said, "If you regret it, I'll never bring it up again." I didn't answer that either. He nodded, turned, and left the room. The silence afterward was louder than any argument could have been. The next day, I watched him differently. He wasn't a boy. He wasn't acting reckless. He wasn't chasing me. He was there, quiet, waiting, giving me space to choose. That restraint made everything worse, because it made me want him more. I started noticing things I shouldn't have. The way he stood behind me in the kitchen. The way his eyes followed me when he thought I wasn't looking. The way I held my breath when he entered a room. One night, we crossed paths by the sauna again. I told him I was going in. He said okay. I walked past him. His hand brushed mine. Not accidental this time. And I didn't pull away. I sat there in the heat, thinking about that first night he saw me. About the way things had unraveled since then. I knew what I was about to do. I didn't try to stop myself. When I came out, he was still there, sitting quietly, waiting. I walked past him again, and he followed me with his eyes. Neither of us said a word, but everything was said in that silence. The next day, we didn't pretend anymore. There were touches now. Light ones, casual to anyone else, but deliberate to us. A hand on the small of my back. A brush of fingers when passing something. The space between us grew smaller every time we were alone. I started lying to my husband. Small lies. Harmless ones at first. Then more. I needed excuses, explanations, reasons for the way I was acting. For the way I was coming alive again. I hated myself for it. But I couldn't stop. I was pulled to Tyler in a way I didn't expect. It wasn't just attraction. It was the connection. The way he made me feel. The way he looked at me like I was still someone worth noticing. It felt dangerous. And it felt necessary. By the end of that week, I knew it was no longer about what might happen. It was about what I was already letting happen. What I was allowing to grow. I wasn't confused anymore. I knew exactly what I was doing. And I wasn't ready to stop. I told myself it couldn't happen again. That the kiss was a mistake, that the growing tension could still be stopped. But I didn't stop it. I didn't even try. The pull between us had become constant, like gravity. I found myself drifting toward him without realizing it, choosing moments to be near him, seeking any excuse to talk, to be in the same space. One night it happened. There wasn't a dramatic build-up or a long pause for doubt. It was inevitable. We were alone. The look in his eyes told me everything. And I didn't resist. I let it happen. I let him touch me, kiss me again, this time slower, deeper, with purpose. Every second of it burned into me, and I didn't care what lines were being crossed. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't clumsy. It was deliberate, and it shattered the last of whatever boundaries were still standing. For the first time in so long, I felt wanted, not just physically but fully. The way he touched me, the way he looked at me, it wasn't about lust. It was intimacy. And I responded to it in ways I hadn't with anyone in years. Afterward, I sat alone in the bathroom, staring at my reflection again, but I didn't feel shame. I felt panic, because I knew this was going to continue. I didn't regret it. That scared me more than anything. Over the next few days, we didn't speak about it. We didn't need to. The looks we shared said enough. Every time we passed each other, my skin remembered. And every time we were alone, the tension returned instantly. I started living two lives. In one, I was the wife who made dinner, folded laundry, smiled when my husband talked about work. In the other, I was someone else entirely. With Tyler, I felt different. Awake. It was dangerous how natural it began to feel, how easy it was to sneak touches, to whisper things under our breath while my husband was in the next room. We learned each other's rhythms. When to be cautious, when to steal a moment. We became reckless in subtle ways, fingers brushing under the table, glances that lingered too long. Sometimes he would pass me in the hallway and let his hand trail across my lower back, just long enough to send a message. I never stopped him. The guilt didn't go away. It sat in my chest, dull but steady. I tried to push it aside by telling myself my marriage was already dead. We hadn't connected in so long that it felt more like cohabitation than a partnership. I was just a placeholder in my husband's routine, someone who filled space but didn't occupy it emotionally. Tyler reminded me of everything I'd been missing. But even that justification wore thin. The truth was I was making a choice. Every time I met Tyler's eyes, every time I didn't pull away, I was choosing this. I had stopped being a victim of circumstance. I had become the architect of betrayal. It didn't stop me. One afternoon, I caught Tyler watching me when I was on the phone with my husband. There was no shame in his gaze, no hesitation. Just intensity. He wasn't a secret I was hiding, he was something I was feeding. And he knew it. That night, he kissed me again. I didn't push him away. I leaned into it, deepened it. I let him lead me to the edge, and over it again. We didn't talk afterward. We didn't need to. But things couldn't stay hidden forever. My husband began noticing my distance. He asked if I was okay. I lied without blinking. He suggested we spend more time together. I nodded and made excuses. I had become so good at lying that it scared me. Tyler started changing too. He wasn't content with silence anymore. He started asking questions. What was going to happen when he left? What did this mean? Did I ever think about telling the truth? I shut those questions down quickly. This wasn't a love story. It was a secret, one that would destroy too many lives if it ever came out. He didn't argue, but I saw the shift in his eyes. Hurt, frustration, maybe even anger. The more time passed, the more complicated everything became. I began catching myself daydreaming about a version of life where this wasn't a secret, where I didn't have to lie to everyone around me. But that life didn't exist. And I had no intention of blowing mine up to chase something that couldn't survive in daylight. Tyler pulled away slightly. Not completely, but I could feel the difference. He was more guarded, more careful. I think he realized that no matter what this felt like, I wasn't going to leave my husband. And even if I did, what would that make us? The cracks started showing. We'd go days without speaking outside of necessary words. Then one touch would break the silence, and we'd fall right back into it. The pattern became exhausting. The highs were electric, the lows unbearable. One evening, I walked into the kitchen and found him packing a bag. I asked if he was going somewhere. He said he needed space. Just for a few days. I didn't argue. I nodded and walked away before he could see the panic on my face. When he left, the house felt hollow. My husband didn't notice anything. He thought Tyler was just visiting friends. I played along, all while checking my phone constantly, waiting for some sign from him. It came 2 days later, a simple text that said, "I miss you." When he returned, we didn't talk. But the next time we were alone, he kissed me again. This time, it felt heavier, more desperate. Like he was trying to reclaim something that had started to slip. And I let him. Again. I had stopped pretending it wasn't an affair.
It was.
It had been for weeks. I had become someone I didn't recognize, and worse, someone I didn't want to stop being. The guilt didn't leave, but it no longer mattered enough to change my behavior. We were spiraling. Both of us knew it, but neither of us could stop. We were already in too deep. I always thought we had a good marriage than I expected. Not perfect, I thought I had control, but solid. I thought the boundaries we'd been together for 17 years, even while breaking them, most accounts, would somehow we had built a life from the inevitable. People would envy. But nothing about this house in the suburbs, manageable 2 anymore. Kids, steady it jobs. Had consumed me. My wife changed the way Jenna I thought. Was beautiful, breathed, intelligent, and the kind of woman who lit up any room she walked everything into. Cracked. She worked the first in PR, real shift, so she was came when my husband brought up a weekend getaway. Always on. He wanted to reconnect. And me, said
I
he
worked
missed
in
me.
IT.
I
Quiet,
said yes.
behind the scenes.
Out of guilt,
We
more than
balanced each
desire.
other.
Tyler
Our
didn't
kids
say
were our world.
anything when I told
Michael,
him we'd be
our
gone.
oldest, was 15,
He just
sharp,
nodded,
a little
jaw
quiet,
tight,
but
eyes
incredibly
distant.
observant.
That
Maybe
silence
too
stayed with
observant.
me the entire
Lily,
trip.
our youngest,
It was awful.
was 8,
full of
forced.
energy
My
and
husband
questions.
tried.
From the
I didn't.
outside,
I
we
couldn't.
were the picture of
Every
stability.
word.
But
Every
I started
smile
noticing
felt like
things that didn't
performance.
sit right. I let him
Small
touch me out of
things.
obligation.
Jenna
became
but the
more
disconnect
distracted
was
during dinner.
unbearable.
She started
I felt
spending
like
more
I was
time
cheating
at the
on
office
Tyler with my own
or
husband,
grabbing
and
drinks
that
with
realization
clients.
made me sick.
Her phone, when we got
which used
back,
to sit on the kitchen
Tyler
counter,
wasn't home.
was suddenly
His door
glued
was
to her
closed
hand
or
or
empty.
face down with the
Hours
screen
passed.
off.
I didn't jump
waited,
to conclusions.
pacing,
You
restless.
don't. Not after
When
17
he finally
years.
came back,
You
he didn't
explained things
acknowledge me.
away. He
Maybe
walked
she's
past
tired.
me like I
Maybe
didn't
work's
exist.
gotten more demanding.
It burned more than
Maybe
I
I've
expected.
become boring.
That night,
I started trying
I knocked
harder.
on his door.
Clean the
He
kitchen
opened it
before
but
she got
didn't
home.
step aside.
Booked a weekend
He
trip.
asked,
What
"What
do you
her
want me
about
to
her
be
day
to
more
you?"
often?"
I
She
had no
smiled
answer
and thanked me.
I stood there,
but it felt like her
silence
eyes were
suffocating,
somewhere else.
and he shook
like I
his
was
head,
talking to her
then
through a
closed the
fog.
door without
It wasn't
waiting
just
for a
her,
response.
Michael
I
started
didn't
pulling
sleep.
away too.
The next day,
He was
I tried
never
to
the
find
type to
him,
overshare,
to
but we
talk,
used to have
to
our
explain,
routines.
but explain
late
what?
night movies,
That I was
weekend
married and
hikes.
selfish and
that
broken?
changed.
That I
He
didn't
got
want to let go of
quieter.
either of them?
Looked at me
But I
differently.
had destroyed
I
the one
chalked
good
it up
thing in
to
my life
teenage
because
mood
I
swings.
craved being
But
seen.
once, after
Eventually,
school,
he came
I
to
asked
me.
him if everything
His
was
tone
okay,
was flat,
and he looked
distant.
at me like he
He
wanted
said
to say
he needed to
something,
start thinking
like
about
it was
his
on the
own
tip of
life
his
again.
tongue. But all he
Grad
said
school,
was, "Moving
yeah,
out, the future."
I'm good.
He said
The thing
he
is,
wasn't
I wanted to
angry,
believe
just
everything was
tired.
still okay.
I told him I didn't
needed
want
to
him to
believe
go,
that,
and he looked
Jenna
at me like he
and
couldn't
I
figure
had
out
built a
if
life
that made him
over
weak
almost
or
2 decades.
just foolish.
You don't just
The
let
final
doubt creep
time it
in
happened
and
between
destroy it
us,
because
it was
someone
different.
seems distant,
Quieter.
I reminded
Slower.
myself that
Like we
marriage
both
isn't
knew
always
it
a
would be
fairy
the
tale.
last. You go
There was
through
no
phases.
rush, no
I
stolen
convinced
urgency.
myself it was
Just
just
two people trying to
phase.
hold on to
I
something
kept
that
pushing
had
those
already
thoughts
slipped
down,
through their fingers.
but they didn't go away.
When it was over,
One night,
we didn't speak.
Jenna came home
We
late.
didn't even look at
It was
each
a
other.
Thursday.
He started
I remember
packing the
because
next
I had
day.
made her favorite
I didn't
pasta
ask questions
and even opened a
I
bottle
didn't
of
beg
wine.
him to stay.
She walked in
I didn't
around
have the right.
10:30.
My
Said she
husband
had dinner
noticed
with
the
the
sudden
client,
change,
kissed my cheek,
asked if
and
we
went
had
straight
argued.
upstairs.
I said no.
I looked at the table.
He said
two
he'd miss
untouched
him,
plates,
that the
cold
house wouldn't be
pasta,
the same.
a full glass
I nodded
of wine
and
waiting.
said nothing.
I told
On his
myself
last
again.
night,
Tyler
just
left a note
tired.
on the counter.
Then there were the
Just
gym
a few
clothes.
words.
She had
Take
never
care of
been one to
yourself.
care much for fitness.
I mean it. But
I
stared
suddenly
at it
she
for
was
a
up
long
at
time.
6, hitting the
I didn't
gym
cry.
before work.
I
wearing
couldn't.
new workout
I
gear.
felt too hollow for
She
that.
said it made her
After
feel
he left,
energized. The
I
silence
admired
in the
her
house
commitment.
became
Even
unbearable.
felt guilty
My
for not
husband
doing the
thought
same.
I was upset
But
about
something
him
about
moving
it
out.
didn't add up.
He told me
She
I'd
never
grow
mentioned
close to him
anyone new
again
at the
someday.
gym.
I
Never
forced
invited
a
me
smile
along.
and said, even once.
Maybe.
I let
Days
it go.
blurred into
I
weeks.
thought I was
I
imagining
moved
things
through my
until
routines
Michael made
like
a
a
comment
ghost.
one afternoon
I
while
kept
we were
expecting
folding
to
laundry.
hear his footsteps,
I asked him
to
how
see
school
him walk
was,
through the
just small
door.
talk, and
I checked
out
my
of
phone
nowhere
more
he
often
said,
than I want to admit.
"Do you ever think
But
people
never
change
reached
when they
out.
don't want to be who they
And
used
I
to
never
be?"
messaged him either.
I paused.
We both knew
It
that
felt loaded.
line.
But
Once
I
crossed,
asked what he meant.
didn't have a way back.
He shrugged.
One night,
Nothing. My
just
husband asked
people
me
act
outright
different
if I was
sometimes.
unhappy.
You don't notice
I
it
almost
right
told
away.
him everything.
I kept
not to
folding
confess,
shirts,
but
my
because
heart
I
beating
was
faster.
suffocating in the weight
Was he
of what
talking
I'd
about
done.
Jenna?
But
I
about
didn't.
himself?
I
I
said I
didn't
was
ask.
tired and
I should have.
he accepted it.
But I didn't
Maybe
want to
he
open
already
that
knew.
door. The
Maybe
thing
he
is,
didn't want the
Jenna was
truth.
never cruel.
I wouldn't blame him.
She was still affectionate.
I've spent
still
every
said,
day
"I love
since
you,"
trying to make
still
sense of
played
it.
with Lily after
Of
work,
how I allowed it
still
to
laughed
happen.
at my corny
Of
jokes.
what it meant.
That's what
I don't
made
think
it
it was
harder
just
to believe
desire.
anything was
It was
wrong.
emotional.
There wasn't a
Deep,
big fight,
a
no
connection I
Cold
didn't
War between
expect,
us, and didn't know
just
how
a
to
feeling.
handle. Like
But
something was
knowing that doesn't
decaying
make it
beneath the
right.
surface.
I think
And
about
we
him
were too
more than I
polite
want
to
to
talk
admit.
about the smell.
Not just the
One
moments we
Saturday,
shared.
I asked her
but
if
the
she wanted to go on a
silence between
weekend
them.
trip.
The
Just
way
the
he
two of
made me
us.
feel.
She
Alive.
smiled and said,
Exposed.
"Maybe
Terrified.
in a few weeks."
weeks.
Wanted.
Work's hectic.
It's a dangerous
right now.
thing
To be seen
She
too
always
clearly.
had the right answer.
Sometimes I
Not
wonder
dismissive,
if I ruined his
not
idea of
defensive.
love. If
Just
I was just a
slippery.
detour,
I
he'll
started to
regret
question
later.
myself.
Other times
more than
I wonder
questioned
if
her.
I was the first
Maybe
person
I was insecure.
who ever saw him
Maybe
the way
I was
he
looking
needed
for
to be
problems
seen.
where there were
Either
none.
way, I
didn't want to
him.
be the jealous husband
He changed
who
me
goes
too.
through phones
I haven't
or
told
tracks
anyone.
locations.
I never will.
That wasn't me.
It lives in
that
the quiet
wasn't our
spaces of my
marriage.
mind.
But doubt,
the in-between
once
moments
it's in,
when everything
spreads
else
like
fades.
ink in water.
I think that's
Every
the worst
unanswered
part.
call, not the
Every
guilt,
muffled laugh
but the
behind
memory
a
of
closed
something
door.
that felt so
Every
real.
delayed reply
knowing
chipped
it can't
away
be
at
spoken
the
aloud.
version of our life
I look at my
I thought
husband
was
now,
real.
and
Then
feel
there
a
was the
quiet
time we went out for
sadness.
dinner as a
He's
family.
not cruel.
Midway
He's
through
not
the meal,
distant anymore.
Jenna got a text.
He tries.
Her phone
But
buzzed
I
on the
can't
table.
unsee the difference
She
between
glanced
being
at it,
loved and
face
being
tight, and
noticed.
quickly put it away.
I wish I didn't know
Michael
the difference.
saw it too.
Life
I
has settled
watched
back
him
into
watching
a
her.
rhythm. His
What
jaw
I know
clenched.
is built on
He
silence.
didn't say a word,
and
but
denial.
he didn't touch his food
I've
after
become
that.
good at pretending.
Later
again.
that night,
When
people
I was
think
tucking
I'm
Lily in,
composed.
I
They
heard
think
voices
everything is
downstairs.
fine. Michael
And
and
maybe
Jenna.
that's the point.
He was saying
The people
something
who
low,
break the most
urgent.
often were the
I couldn't
calmest
make out the
expressions.
words, but
Tyler
I
is
caught
gone.
one phrase as I
The
got to the
story
stairs.
ended without drama.
He doesn't know, does
without
he?
confrontation.
Jenna didn't reply.
Just silence.
Just silence.
I don't know if
A
I'd
thick,
even recognize
unnatural
him if I saw
silence.
him again.
I didn't go
Not
down.
because he's
I
changed,
stood
but
frozen on
because
the
I
steps.
have. My
I
heart
used to think
pounding,
infidelity was
my
about
mind running in
sex, about
circles.
impulse.
What didn't I know?
Now I know it's
Who
more
didn't
than
I
that.
know? It's about
After that,
absence.
I started paying
about
attention
what you're not
more
getting,
deliberately.
what you're craving.
I watched her,
and how,
not as
when
a
someone
husband
finally
in love,
gives it to you,
but as
it
someone
doesn't
trying
feel
to solve
wrong
the
at
puzzle
all
until
I
it's
took
over.
note of
And then
every
all your
little
left with is the
inconsistency.
echo of
She had
something that
become
was
more
never
careful.
supposed to happen.
Or maybe I
And
had become more
sometimes
aware.
that echo
But the
is
result
louder
was the
than
same.
anything else.
I couldn't unsee what I had ignored for so long.
Michael, meanwhile, kept up his distance. He was polite, present, but something in his eyes had changed. Like he was holding a secret too heavy for his age. He started spending more time in his room. When we watched a movie together, he barely spoke. When I asked if he was okay, he just nodded, eyes on the screen. I began to feel like an outsider in my own home. Conversations would stop when I entered a room. Jenna's smiles didn't reach her eyes. Even Lily began asking, "Are you and Mommy mad at each other?" I laughed it off, told her everything was fine, but inside I knew I was lying. To her. To myself. I tried to convince myself that maybe this was still salvageable. Maybe I was just going through some midlife insecurity, reading too much into things. I started journaling, thinking maybe writing it out would give me clarity. Instead, all it did was put my fears in black and white. And once they were written down, they felt real. Still, I did nothing. I didn't confront. I didn't accuse. I waited. For what I didn't know. Proof? Courage? A confession? What I didn't expect was for the truth to come from someone who had seen it long before I had. Someone I never thought would be the one to say the words I couldn't. And when he did, my world cracked in half. But not just because of what he said. Because he had known. He had carried that truth. And I hadn't even noticed.